Welcome to the 18th episode of Always Remember World War II Through Veterans' Eyes, Victory at Last, Part 1. Having led his country through the most devastating and consequential war in world history, President Franklin D. Roosevelt died just as the war's end seemed in sight. For GIs like Roland Schump, Murray Shapiro, and Samuel Erlick, the loss of the only president they had ever really known was as unsettling as it was shocking. In the final weeks of the war, as Germany's defeat seemed all but certain, GIs still didn't know what to expect as they liberated city after city. Many German soldiers couldn't wait to surrender to the Americans, who they preferred over the Russians, while other Germans fought on ferociously. No GIs wanted to lose their lives or see their buddies lose theirs so close to the end. Commander of A Company, Michael J. Daly, felt so protective of his men in the final days of the war that he took out 4 machine gun nests and 15 Germans on his own during fierce fighting at Nuremberg. Most of the German soldiers Roland Schump now met didn't seem to want to fight any more than he did. In the confusion of the final days, Sherril Hayes nearly accidentally shot an elderly grandfather and his grandchild. Hayes would never have forgiven himself. In fierce fighting at Cheb in Czechoslovakia, Harry Koty's outfit found themselves outnumbered and outgunned by 10 German tanks. Charles Savage exchanged fire with a deadly sniper in Pilzen, Czechoslovakia, before he liberated a baby factory in Marienbad. Arnold Dutch Nagel was nearly taken out by friendly fire in the final days of the war. Earl Lovelace remembered a man from his company that was. An excited Dallas Finch couldn't wait to pen a letter home as he stood guard outside the war room at the supreme headquarters of the Allied Expeditionary Forces as the Allied commanding officers accepted the unconditional surrender of the German forces. These stories and more in this episode of Always Remember World War II Through Veterans' Eyes. During the 1990s, while serving as a teacher with the Department of Defense schools in Bad Kreuznach, Germany, my family and I visited many of the sites associated with World War II, from the beaches of Normandy, where the D-Day landings took place, to the Ardennes forest, where the Battle of the Bulge was fought, to the death camps of Auschwitz, Buchenwald, and Dachau. We saw what was at stake in World War II, when not only democracy in the U.S., but throughout the world hung in the balance. I began to write to World War II veterans to thank them for their service. I sent them pictures of the sites we visited. I invited them to share their stories with me, and I promised to keep them alive in the classes that I taught. What I never could have anticipated was that veterans shared their stories with their buddies and printed my letters in their reunion newsletters. I was soon corresponding with approximately 140 World War II veterans, 20 of whom received the nation's highest honor, the Medal of Honor. I had more material than I could ever use in the classes that I taught. To keep my promise, I wrote Always Remember World War II Through Veterans' Eyes, and I launched this series of podcasts, which are based upon the book. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the longest-serving president in U.S. history, had led his nation through a Great Depression and a World War. With victory seemingly within sight, and having completed just 4 months of his 4th term in office, President Roosevelt suffered a massive cerebral hemorrhage while vacationing at his beloved Little White House in Warm Springs, Georgia, on April 12, 1945. President Roosevelt was just 63 years old. Upon receiving the news of Roosevelt's death from propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels, Hitler toasted the death of his nemesis with champagne from his underground bunker in Berlin. But the death of their president left most GIs feeling like they had suffered a body blow. In a Yank magazine article dated May 25, 1945, Private First Class Lester Rebuck, a medic from the 104th Division, described his feelings upon hearing the news. "It was just like somebody socked me in the stomach when I wasn't looking. I just couldn't get it through my head that he was really dead. For my money, that guy was one of the greatest guys that ever lived. You can put him next to Lincoln or Washington or anybody." Roland Schump recalled becoming very worried when President Roosevelt died. "We didn't know what might happen, as we still had Japan to deal with." Murray Shapiro of Chatsworth, California, wrote his parents, "Well, I was stunned to hear the news of the president's death. I believe in a very short historical time that he will rank with Lincoln, and maybe even in a longer time ahead of him." Samuel Erlick of Cherry Hill, New Jersey, was also very saddened when he died in April of 1945. It was announced by a sergeant at a morning roll call. The president they had grown up with had died, even as the war he had led them to win was nearly won. The GIs didn't need any more reminders of their own mortality. Michael J. Daly of Southport, Connecticut, was the company commander of A Company when he led them through the ruins of Nuremberg, Germany on April 18, 1945. Although the nation's highest military honor would later be bestowed upon him for his actions on that day, Daly wrote that the greatest honor he ever received was having been chosen to command the men of his company. "Perhaps the greatest honor our country can bestow is to entrust a military officer with command of American soldiers in combat. Besides the responsibility is the respect and affection you have for the men in your company, citizen soldiers involved in a cause greater than themselves, a cause that could not fail." By the time Daly's company arrived at Nuremberg, there were very few survivors from the original company that had landed at Omaha Beach on D-Day. You felt compelled to do your best to protect them. Daly did his best and then some when the company came under intense machine gun fire as they entered the ruins of Nuremberg. Somehow, Lieutenant Daly managed to take out 3 machine gun emplacements with his deadly accurate rifle. He took out the last machine gun nest from just 10 yards away. By the time he was done, he had killed 15 German soldiers. Daly reflected on his actions that day in a 1999 letter. "We all have our courage at times. It is something you pray for in the morning, that God will give you the strength and the courage to do what is right. And of course, luck plays a crucial part in combat." Daly's luck ran out the following day when he was shot through the throat, permanently affecting his voice. For Daly, it was his $1 million wound, and he was sent home a war hero, receiving the Medal of Honor from President Truman a few months later. Perhaps his luck had not run out after all. As the war in Europe drew to an end in the spring of 1945, Roland Schump of Iowa City, Iowa, recalled that many Germans couldn't wait to surrender. "These guys were just regular army," he wrote. "They didn't want to fight any more than we did." Schump recalled once when 147 Germans surrendered to his platoon alone. Despite the inevitability of their defeat, the German soldiers maintained their military discipline, sometimes better than the American GIs, as Schump recalled. "A group of Germans surrendered to our unit, and this German officer approached this young GI and said that he would not surrender his weapon to no one except an officer of his rank or higher. The kid knocked the officer to the ground with the butt of his rifle, and he took his gun away, and then he said, 'Next time I ask for your goddamn gun, give it to me or I'll shoot you.'" Schump got to know the German POWs much better after the war, when he found himself guarding them back in the States at old Fort George, Washington, on the Potomac River, just south of Washington, D.C. Many of the German POWs expressed they wanted to stay in the U.S. Schump wrote, "I could sympathize with them the way their country was torn, but then I remembered They started the damn war." Schump understood what was at stake in World War II and added, "Had Germany and Japan won the war, this country would have been one huge concentration camp." Sherril Hayes recalled that during the last few months of the war, as his battalion liberated small towns along the Ruhr and Rhine rivers, resistance was sometimes only minor, and in some instances, fierce in others. To make the towns completely safe, houses were often searched from top to bottom. While searching one such house, Hayes did not get a response when he called into the basement. Fearing someone was hiding down there, Hayes threw down a hand grenade. After it exploded, Hayes cautiously walked down the basement steps. He found the basement empty, except for a pile of quilts lying in the corner. Still thinking that someone might be hiding underneath the quilts, Hayes ordered them to surrender and reveal themselves. Failing to get a response, Hayes fired his .45 caliber Thompson machine gun into the quilts. To my amazement, an elderly man and a child around 7 or 8 years of age emerged from underneath the quilts. Luckily, the bullets from my gun did not penetrate the quilts. They were smiling as I motioned them up the stairway. Hayes' regiment also struggled with meeting the needs of thousands of German soldiers who were surrendering at the end of the war. Finding themselves in Schwerin, the oldest city in the province of Mecklenburg at the end of the war, Hayes' regiment had to deal with a swelling mass of confusion, with civilians as well as military surrendering. Slave laborers who wore filthy clothes and half-starved roamed about. It was difficult to stay alert for any uprising that might materialize. Within 2 days, 55,000 German troops had surrendered and were more or less herded into open fields on the outskirts of the city. Before the end of the week, the prisoner count mounted to over 200,000. By April 1945, it was obvious that the Nazi stranglehold of Germany was taking its final gasps. In the final weeks of the war, German soldiers were surrendering by the thousands, yet many continued to fight on ferociously for the fatherland. Harry Koty of Strongsville, Ohio, also served with the 97th Infantry Division in Company B of the 303rd Regiment. He was part of the liberation of Cheb in the Czech Republic on April 25, 1945. 50 years later, he returned to the city and found the Liberation Monument commemorating 20 of his fellow infantrymen who died in the intense fighting there. Koty recalled his company had been badly outnumbered. "We were up against about 10 German tanks, and all we had were rifles and a couple of bazookas. They rocked our lines apart with all their heavy stuff. But our men eventually were able to mount the tanks and open the tops and dropped grenades on the crews, and eventually we knocked them out." From Cheb, Koty went on to liberate Marienbad, also in Czechoslovakia. Arnold Dutch Nagel of Delphos, Ohio, recalled that as the war wound down, the older men in his paratrooper company became anxious because they did not want to be killed or drowned at war's end. After 2 years of combat and 4 combat jumps, the idea of getting killed was a little bitter to contemplate. With the end of the war in sight, death, when it came, seemed especially cruel. Friendly fire nearly killed Nagel a week before VE Day. His C Company had to cross the Elbe River in Germany on April 30th, 1945. The river, some 400 yards in width, was to be crossed in flimsy assault boats that the soldiers had to paddle themselves. As C Company crossed, they were mistaken for Germans and had friendly fire dropped on them. After the crossing, Company C was attacked by some Germans still willing to die for the Führer or the fatherland. The Germans used 20mm anti-aircraft guns, like machine guns, firing directly at us. On May 6, 1945, just 2 days before victory was declared in Europe, General Patton's 3rd Army 16th Armored Division liberated the ancient Bohemian city of Pilzen and the Czech Republic. Charles Savage of East Smithfield, Pennsylvania, was there, and he met resistance from sniper fire.
At first, there was not much resistance, and then the snipers started on everyone. One Czech civilian was shot by a sniper as he rode his bike in front of the Opera House. I was behind him. All the snipers seemed to be shooting from church steeples. I guess they thought the Americans would not shoot them in a church. I was on my way down the street in our Jeep to a twin-spired church that was getting our MPs a bad time. Several GIs were there when we got there, and they were scared, nervous Nellies. None of them had hit their target. I had a bazooka with me, so I volunteered to lob a round through the narrow slit called a window. I missed the window and took a chunk of the corner of the steeple away. I went to the church in 1991, and sure enough, the bullet holes and my missing chunk was still in evidence. I cried.
Another SS sniper was firing at the GIs from atop the roof of the Jewish synagogue near Republic Square. Once the GIs discovered that he was there and began returning fire, the sniper began climbing down the rain spout of the synagogue.
As he was climbing down the rain spout, he lost his grip on the machine pistol, and it clattered into the narrow alley, and that is when one of our guys heard the clatter. Thus the end of the SS sniper.
Following the liberation of Pilzen, General Patton intended for his 16th Armored Division to move on to Prague. His reconnaissance units had already been sent there. But a frustrated Patton was told to hold up, as General Eisenhower had made an agreement with the Russians that Prague was theirs to liberate. Even so, the Russians were late getting there, and they didn't arrive at Prague until May 8th or 9th, several days after Patton's troops could have been there. Word spread amongst the GIs in the Third Army of the deal to give the Russians the glory of liberating Prague.
Patton was furious, and we were all disappointed,
Savage recalled. Instead, General Patton's 3rd Army 16th Armored Division moved to several other Bohemian towns, including Mies, now called Strebro, Carlsbad, and Marienbad. Savage stayed several weeks in Marienbad. He found the city, famous for its spas, was left untouched by the war. A hospital existed in the city for wounded German soldiers. Savage recalled that many burn cases and amputees were there. The nurses were caring for the casualties as best they could, but they lacked medicine, bandages, painkiller, and food. Savage recalled the American GIs found an abandoned hospital train full of supplies.
We liberated all these items, and we took everything to the nurses, who thought that we were going to kill them.
Marienbad's hotels had also served as baby factories for the SS Lebensborn program, whose purpose was to propagate the Aryan race. Women were chosen for the program based on their racial characteristics. Blonde hair and blue eyes were a must, and they had to be free of any genetic disorders. These women swore allegiance to the Nazi Party and were impregnated, often by SS officers who had their own families. No less than Heinrich Himmler himself, the feared Nazi leader of the SS and the Gestapo, encouraged his men to impregnate the women out of wedlock to further the Nazi master race. The pregnant women, who generally were single, were sent to these factories to give birth and to be cared for by SS-employed doctors and nurses. Approximately 6,000 to 8,000 babies were born in these baby factories that were spread throughout Germany and in neighboring countries. In Marienbad, the ordeal of the women of the baby factories wasn't over yet. The GIs were ordered to send the Lebensborn women back to the German towns they came from.
We had the unpleasant duty of herding all these young women together with their babies and other children, plus the pregnant mothers, and trucked them all back to the towns and villages they had come from in Germany. This was pathetic. Thank God I had no part in this. These women were dumped off in the towns where nothing was left standing. No food, shelter, nothing unless the American military government had started to revitalize the town again. The American military government had their orders, too, from Supreme Headquarters. Patton was furious. Like most of the GIs who served under his command, General Patton didn't trust the Russians. Patton believed the war had been fought to free Europe, and he didn't understand why the Allies were going to allow Russia to carve it back up. Savage recalled, "On September 22, 1945, General George S. Patton had planned to invade Russia. He told us so in a speech. Most of the Third Army firmly believed that he was conveniently assassinated." Interestingly, Savage did not speculate as to which side was behind the supposed assassination. After 320 days of combat with the 38th Regiment of the 2nd Division, fighting his way from Omaha Beach across France, Belgium, and Germany, Earl Lovelace of Santa Barbara, California, recalled his unit's last senseless death just as it approached Pilzen, Czechoslovakia. On May 6, 1945, just 2 days before VE Day, Lovelace rode with the 16th Armored Division, part of General Patton's Third Army, as its troop convoys approached Pilzen to liberate it. Our convoy of troop carrying trucks was halted just before the city of Pilzen. The men were all very tired, and they were complaining that we had fought our part of the war, and we should have remained back near Leipzig, relaxing and waiting for the Red Army. The convoy was stopped, but we had to remain in the vehicles because we could move out at any time. So far, there hadn't been any resistance, but the quiet was suddenly broken by a shot that rang out. As Lovelace watched, a man fell off the back of the truck with a bullet through his head. The troops quickly jumped off their trucks and took cover in the nearby ditch by the roadside. However, there were no more shots, no more reason for alarm. The driver in the truck behind the incident explained that the dead man had fallen asleep with his rifle butt hanging over the tailgate for the truck. His rifle slipped off his shoulder and fired when it hit the ground, Lovelace explained. The death haunted Lovelace. This man had survived through all the war, only to lose his life because he couldn't stay awake any longer. Even as young and as exhausted as they were, American GIs understood that they were part of a momentous chapter in history. Dallas Finch of Grandview, Washington, didn't need to be reminded of the historical significance of his assignment. From May 18, 1944, to the end of the war, he was the chief clerk of the G3 War Room at the Supreme Headquarters of the Allied Expeditionary Forces. As chief clerk, he followed the G3 War Room as it moved from its first location in Bushy Park near London, England, then as of September 1944, to Versailles, France, and finally at its last location in Reims, France. Every morning, Finch prepared the war room for the top Allied commanders. General Dwight D. Eisenhower was always there, and regulars included his chief of staff, General Walter Smith, General Omar Bradley, British Air Marshal Sir Arthur Tedder, British Field Marshal Monty Montgomery, British Admiral Sir Harold Burrell, and British Admiral Lee Mallory. On occasion, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill and General of the Army George C. Marshall even dropped in. The war room itself
was described by Look magazine as the one spot in the universe where every phase of the Allied attack, the position, and the role of every unit was posted, plus intelligence reports on the enemy. As chief clerk, it was Finch's responsibility to see that the room was detailed with the latest wall maps displaying the progress in the European theater, as well as a daily summary of the ground, naval, and air operations, weather, and casualty reports. Finch literally was at the heart of the Allied war operation. Although he met almost all of the European theater's top commanders, he was most impressed with General Eisenhower, whom Finch had nothing but superlatives to say about in a March 19, 1996 letter.
General Eisenhower, was a great general who controlled many and varied military and political leaders, including Churchill, with skill and with tact. He was a soldier's general, and he did not sacrifice their well-being or lives for his own personal stature. He was always friendly to me on the occasions when we passed to and from the war room. He always said, "Good morning, Sergeant," which made my day.
Finch was there on May 7, 1945, when German General Gustav Jodl signed the unconditional surrender, ending the war in Europe. Negotiations had actually begun 2 days earlier, on May 5th, when German General Admiral Hans von Freudenberg had arrived to the war room to begin talks with Lieutenant General Walter Bedell Smith. Finch recalled the war room was abuzz with speculation of the imminent surrender as the personnel stocked it with writing paper, pens, pencils, ashtrays, name tags, and microphones. By the time Lieutenant General Smith signed for the Allied forces, Major General Ivan Susioparov signed for the Russians, and General Jodl signed for the Germans, Finch was exhausted after having pulled a 30-hour shift in the war room. Instead of going out to celebrate,
"I went to my billets, stretched out on my bunk bed, and wrote a long letter to my wife. She still has it."
Finch shared the letter with the author. He could hardly contain his exuberance in the first paragraph as he declared the war in Europe over.
"It's like a dream, but a very happy one. I've had the wonderful opportunity of being right here where the act was consummated, and I can still hardly believe it. But it is true, honey. I saw the paper. I saw the Germans go in the war room to sign it. I saw and I heard General Eisenhower make the broadcast recording, and I'm awfully happy and relieved, and my heart is with you tonight. We're almost through now, honey. The big step has been taken, and the world will be free again soon now."
Finch recalled that on May 6, when General Jodl and General Admiral von Freudenberg stepped out of their car, a formation of German prisoners of war happened to be going by.
"You should have seen their faces when they saw these two Jerry officers get out of the car."
For the next 30 hours, German officers debated the terms of the surrender with Chief of Staff General Smith behind closed doors. Shortly before 2 a.m., a dog-tired Finch and his buddy Mike Schumer decided to lie down and try to get some sleep,
when the colonel came rushing in to tell us that the boys were ready to sign. We all hopped around on last-minute details, and then we watched for the parade.
Shortly before 2:30 a.m., Chief of Staff General Smith, British Air Marshal Sir Arthur Tedder, General Karl Spaatz, commander of the Strategic Air Command in Europe, Russian generals and German generals Jodl and Freudenberg passed by Finch's office and entered the war room for the formal signing. Finch lamented that the war room's
doors were closed and we didn't get to see the actual signing of the papers.
But as soon as it was over, they were opened up, and the press began taking pictures of the treaty signing. Correspondents and photographers from Life, Time, Stars and Stripes, and many other publications were there. Finch had a few moments to straighten the room before General Eisenhower arrived to make his statements.
"I got to stand in the doorway and see and hear all of that. They took hundreds of pictures of him. Then the newsreels were taken,"
Finch wrote in his letter to his wife.
"Honey, when and if you see him, think of me standing there, about 15 feet behind the camera, watching it all with my open eyes."
Once General Eisenhower completed his remarks, Finch and his friend Mike Schumer re-entered the room to clear it. They soon found that not a single ashtray, name tag, or notepad remained. Recognizing the historical significance of the event, the reporters had taken whatever souvenirs they could find. But Finch had grabbed General Yodel's yellow lead pencil from his notepad the first time he had entered the room.
"Ordinarily, I'm not a souvenir collector, but I wanted to have something from this historical occasion to show my children and to say, I was there when..."
Exhausted, Finch finally retired to his room to get some much-needed sleep, foregoing the celebrations that had broken out amongst the other men. He wrote his wife,
"Here I'm celebrating as I had planned, all alone in my room, thinking of our happiness, and writing to you."
The surrender was officially confirmed later that day, and hostilities throughout Europe ceased almost immediately. May 8th was designated VE Day. Our song today, "We'll Be Singing Hallelujah, Marching Through Berlin," was recorded by the Royal Harmony Quartet in 1942. The Royal Harmony Quartet, a pioneering African-American gospel group, was active from the 1930s to the 1960s and eventually became known as the Jubilaires. If you liked this podcast of Always Remember, World War II Through Veterans' Eyes, please leave us a review on whatever podcast network you use. Follow our podcasts and tell your friends. New episodes come out bi-weekly. You can find the companion book on Amazon.com. Until next time, thank you for remembering our World War II veterans.